Hello and welcome to Troubleshooting Your Zaps. My name is Andy Wingrave, and in this session I'll be helping you troubleshoot your Zaps, as the title suggests. So before we start, I'd like to thank the team at Zapier for inviting me to present at ZapConnect. It's a very exciting time in our industry and it's an honour to be speaking to you all today. So let's take a look at what I'll be walking you through this afternoon. After the introduction, we will discuss the types of error notifications that you can see as you build your Zaps and as they're running. We'll then hop into troubleshooting your Zaps when building them. From there, we'll use the Zap history interface to troubleshoot our Zaps. We will then also look at the common error types. And finally, I will show you the Zap status page where you can look at the external factors that cause your Zaps to fail. Lastly, we'll do a recap of the session and I'll let you know where you can find me if you have any follow-up questions. But first, let me introduce my robot gang. Well, here's me. So I spend most of my time helping my clients automate their workflows. This is UIX 3000, who helps me with all things visual, like my YouTube channel and my Twitch streams. Next up, we've got Chatterchap, who is a mainstay at the bottom right of my website. He likes to chat, and that's about all he does. Then we've got Blogbot, who is an expert at writing content for my website and blog. And finally, we've got Otto, who helps power all of my automations. And when we're not busy automating, we all like to get together and have a bit of a boogie, because all of our work is done and we can rest safe in the knowledge that everything's running smoothly in the background, automating away, and we like to let loose. But on occasion, just as we thought everything was going smoothly, we get an error message telling us that our automation and our Zap has errored. And when that happens, it's important that we know how to effectively troubleshoot our Zaps so we can act quickly to ensure that we solve the issue as soon as possible. And today, we hope to share with you some of those hints and tips about troubleshooting your Zaps. So what kind of error notifications can we expect to see in Zapier, and where will they appear? Well, the first place we might encounter an error in Zapier is when we create the Zap itself. So this is typically the first place we encounter errors, and it's usually just after you hit test and continue or test and review. This is basically when you're building the Zap, you get an opportunity to see whether there was a success or a failure. The second place we might encounter an error notification might be once we turn the Zap on. So Zapier sends us an alert that looks like this and tells us that something has gone wrong with our live Zap and we should investigate. You can see that the email copy contains some key information about the error so we can begin identifying what could have gone wrong immediately. It tells us what Zap caused the error, so we know which part of our workflow was affected. It also shows us the error message itself. In this case, it says the error is to send a message. It needs to have a CC or a BCC address. So we're trying to send an email and it's actually just flagging that this is not working. So we at least have a little bit of context before we go into our Zap troubleshooting. It's also, as you can see, highlighted in the orange button an opportunity to hop into your Zap history or your task history to identify what might be causing the error. But we'll get to that later on. Finally, the last place we might see an error is the Zap interface itself. So this will tell us the action that's needed on a Zap, and it will prompt you to fix it by offering you two options. Confirm that you want to play these runs. So Zapier is saying that they held them because more runs than usual came through at once in this case. Or it gives you the opportunity just to replay the Zap runs, and you can hop in and choose individually what Zaps you want to run and what ones you don't. But the best way to avoid many of these error messages in the first place is actually to troubleshoot them before you turn them on. So as my old manager that I used to have once said, at every meeting I think I ever had with him, measure twice, cut once. And really what he was trying to say there ad nauseum was that if you check your work and you check what you've created, you're going to avoid errors and kind of issues in the future. So in this case, if we ensure that we configured everything properly in our Zap, before we turn it on, we can avoid many issues before they even happen. And in this section, we'll walk through the troubleshooting steps we can take to ensure our Zap doesn't error because of a mistake we've made. So when building our Zaps, we want to check that all fields are entered correctly and that we're not getting any unexpected errors. In this section, we're going to become a bit more aware of the types of fields that Zapier gives us to create our Zaps, like text fields, drop-downs, booleans, dates, and line items. So by the end of this section, I really hope that you've got a good grasp of these and you understand how to troubleshoot these different types of fields. From there, we want to just check our app connection and our account permissions to ensure that we have set up our authorization for our app properly. Then we also want to highlight that you can read the docs in Zapier and also read any external documentation that might help you troubleshoot your Zap as you build it. So let's dive in, and I've created a little mock demo here, which we're going to go through. In this case, we have a task, excuse me, that we want to troubleshoot. We are creating an invoice in QuickBooks, and we want to make sure that everything we set up is working correctly. And the very first step we want to take is adding a customer to the invoice. And if you're anything like most people, as you begin to use Zapier, you might just start typing in your customer name. So my new customer, or John Smith, or Paul Brown. And that would be the natural thing to do here. But it actually leaves us with a text entry into a drop-down field. So at the end here, we're left with a field where we've entered the customer name, but actually QuickBooks is expecting us to pass through an ID and not a name, and not a kind of text name. So this has made UIX 3000 quite sad, because it's not quite right. Because as you can see, it's a drop-down menu, not a text field. So this means that it requires a specific value or ID to be passed through to the field. And if we were to run the Zap now, it would fail because we've sent through an unexpected value. So we can either choose to map this invoice to a specific customer by clicking on one of the options. So down here, you can see we can just click on one of the options, and this would be appropriate if we wanted to send the same invoice to the same customer every single time Zap ran. But that's actually quite an unlikely scenario, because a more likely one is where we want to ensure that the customer is dynamically allocated to the Zap, and we can choose to insert the ID we found from a prior step by navigating to the custom section. So as you can see here, we've got the custom section here. And in the custom section, we would just add a step, so a prior step to the creating an invoice step, where we find or create the customer. So in this case, you can see here that we are choosing custom, and then we're also bringing in data, dynamic data from a previous step. So instead of choosing the name or typing in the name, we actually navigate to custom and choose the ID, because that is what the QuickBooks API is expecting. And this way we can pass through dynamic data every time the Zap runs. So just like that, we've avoided one of the most common mistakes I see people make in Zapier. And quite honestly, I think if you can get your head around this, you will avoid many mistakes in the future as well. Before we go on to troubleshooting our Zap history, there are some other fields that I wanted to talk to you about today. And those are booleans, dates, and line items. So we'll just cover those just now, that we want to populate, which can be identified by the radio buttons icon next to the description. And as you can see, this accepts the values true or false, which, just as before, can be dynamic or static, depending on our requirements. And we would just make that choice by clicking on the send later element, which would be static, or the custom element, which would be dynamic. In this case, we might want to just send every time, so we can go ahead and choose a static option, which could be true. But we can, of course, use the custom option to send dynamic data through, just like we did with the drop-down menu. The next input type we want to make sure we're aware of is the date input field, which can be identified with the calendar icon. We can populate a date field with the date formatted as a timestamp from a previous step, or we can pass through our own ISO formatted date timestamp. I'm not going to get into date time at the moment, but all I would do is suggest that you read more about dates and times in the Zapier help docs. Next, we want to ensure that we're aware of special types of input, such as line items. This is very important if we're creating something like an invoice, because line items are, as I mentioned, a special type of field where we can enter multiple pieces of data. We can identify the line item fields by the thin gray border surrounding the input. And in order to pass data through to this step, I would always recommend that we create a line itemizer step ahead of this one to ensure our data is passed through in the correct format. You can create the line itemizer from Zapier's formatter application by choosing Utilities and then choosing Line Itemizer. And from there, you can begin building out your line items. So as we can see here, we're building out our line items where we've got our price and we're putting through our price. Now this can be, again, dynamic or static. And then we've got our quantity and we're bringing through our quantity here. And you can see that these items are separated by commas. So this allows us to bring in these special types of fields into the line item field when we create our invoice. And that's it, really. Once you've got your head around these fields and you know how to pass through the correct type of data to them, we are ready to test and review our Zap. And one thing I wanted to flag here, and at this point, is that I always recommend 100% of the time hitting test and review instead of test and continue. And this just gets you into the habit of reviewing that the data you're sending to your application has been sent through correctly. If you get into that habit, you'll make far less mistakes. And you'll make Otto very happy, as you can see. So we've covered the steps to take when troubleshooting your Zaps using the Zap Builder. But in this section, we're going to get a bit more technical and identify some of the core types of errors we can expect to see when troubleshooting. And these are 4xx errors and 5xx errors. We're going to call them 4xx errors. So you can see here, we've got 4 different main types that we'll see. 400 tells us that we've sent a bad request. This could be, for example, where you've sent through a text in a drop-down field, or you sent through a Boolean value in a date field. It basically tells us that the app that we're sending the data to doesn't understand our request. 401 tells us that we need to reauthorize our application, whilst 403 tells us that our account is connected properly, but we're not permitted to perform the action we're trying to perform. Finally, 404 is probably the most ubiquitous error that you come across because it's on many websites, and it tells us that the item that we're looking for doesn't exist. 500 errors, on the other hand, are server errors. And this normally tells us when we get a 500 error or a 5xx error that there's an issue with the application itself. It doesn't understand the request, or it hasn't been configured correctly to receive the request. So when this happens, typically you want to reach out to the application maintainer and find out why that might be. Remember, when you're not sure about any of these errors or what's happening, head on over to the Zapier documentation and the help pages to identify the best course of action for each error. The next thing we want to ensure is that we're connected to the correct account and that our connection is up to date. Often, when we're building, it's advisable to use a sandbox account. This ensures that any data we're sending is not going to affect our live environment. But when you do that, it's important to remember before turning the Zap on to make sure you add the primary account to the Zap, which you can do by clicking Manage Connected Accounts and connecting your account in the following interface, or simply click Connect a new account to quickly add your account in the Zapier Builder. Next up, if we do run into any issues when building our Zap, we can always go to the application help page on zapier.com/apps. On this page, we can search for the application that we're having trouble integrating and find the help docs associated with it. As you can see, at the top here in the search bar, I'm just typing QuickBooks, and you can see that there's 2 types of QuickBooks applications. In this case, we would choose QuickBooks Online and navigate to the help docs. Finally, if we've done everything possible to ensure that our Zap has been set up correctly, we've checked all of our fields, we have checked our app connection, we know we have the permission to do what we're trying to do, and we've checked all of the help docs, we can always go to the Zapier community and ask for help. Here we can see that QuickBooks Online is a popular topic. And once you've posted, someone from the community, and it could be me, will respond and help you out with your query. And that's it. Once we've done all our troubleshooting when we're building our Zap, we're ready to turn it on. But there are still some things that can go wrong once we do. And it's important that we know how to troubleshoot our Zaps based on our Zap's previous runs. So in this section, we'll do some troubleshooting of the Zap history. There are 3 core statuses that we should be aware of when troubleshooting the Zap history. And those are stopped, waiting, and holding. So stop statuses include error tasks where we didn't expect an error, or halted task where an error was expected and the Zap was stopped from proceeding, but we expected that to happen. One thing to note at this stage for your information is that only error tasks will turn a Zap off automatically. It's also important to be aware of the other statuses, which are not quite errors, but instead do give you an indication of why a Zap might not have completed. For example, like waiting. This can happen when we've added a delay step in a Zap or it's been scheduled. And finally, holding, which could be for any number of account-related issues, really, such as high task usage, if too many issues have come through at the same time, or too many Zaps have come through at the same time. It could be to do with issues with account connections, or you might need to upgrade or make a payment in your Zapier account to ensure that the Zap can run. If you do run into any of these issues, I always suggest reaching out to the Zapier support team, who are always very happy to help with these types of matters. So let's actually go in and troubleshoot one of these Zaps. As you can see, this task was halted because instead of a green tick, there's a red hand. So we might want to investigate why this is. So let's dive in and find out why this might have happened. So let's click on the item or the Zap. And first you'll notice at the very top, there's a button which allows us to replay that Zap run. And that could just be, that just gives us the breathing room to go and fix something and then rerun it again. But in this case, we actually just want to scroll down and do some troubleshooting steps. So let's scroll down and find out where the Zap is erroring. In this case, we scrolled to step 6, and we've identified that the error message is that nothing could be found for the search. So if you remember previously, that's a 404 error. And here we can see that the Zap has performed a search and nothing could be found, basically. So now that we've identified the issue, there are a number of things we can do. And I just want to highlight some areas here. We can see what data was passed into the task, and we can see what application returned by navigating between the data in and the data out. And on the right-hand side, we can either click on the documentation, which will take us to the application-specific documentation, or we can click Get Help, which will help us get in touch with the amazing Zapier support team. Next, I think we want to click on Edit this step. So basically, we'll click Data Out, and we can see that this has actually performed the step and it's saying that the Zap data hasn't been found. So really, what we can do is hop in to edit this step, and it takes us directly to that step in Zapier, in the Zapier app, Zap Builder. This will then allow us to perform all of the troubleshooting steps that we went through earlier on in this session, and we can go through each one individually. So before I close up today's session, I want to highlight another resource for you that's available, and that's the Zapier status page. You can get there by going to status.zapier.com, and it will provide you with the 3 key metrics related to system, app status, and incident history. It'll also allow you to sign up to subscribe to the updates so you get up-to-the-minute notifications when something breaks on Zapier. The system metrics will give you information on trigger reliability and response time. So basically, whether there have been any issues with the Zap triggering. The app status will alert you to any issues with specific applications. And finally, the incident history will highlight any major instance within Zapier. So to recap, when troubleshooting your Zaps, first of all, don't panic. Everything will be okay. Then we want to, once we've got over not panicking, because we didn't panic, we want to verify that all of the Zap fields have been filled out accurately. Make sure that booleans are booleans, date fields are date fields, line items are line items, and dropdowns are dropdowns. We want to then examine the app's connection and the account permissions to ensure that we can perform the action we're trying to. We want to read the app's documentation. If we're still stuck, we can find a solution in Zapier's community. Once you've performed all of those steps, you can either contact support, and if all else fails, you can hire an expert like me who'd be delighted to help you get everything up and running. And I hope you managed to catch Andrew Davidson's presentation earlier on how you can do that. Thank you so much for your time and attention. And if you'd like to continue the conversation, you can do that over Twitter by following me at Andy Wingrave. You can subscribe to my YouTube at Sastronomical, or you can send me an email at andy@andywingrave.com. Thanks again.